For over 6 decades, France maintained control over its former colonies through a combination of military interventions, economic strangleholds, political puppetry, and cultural influence. However, that era is coming to an end. One by one, nations are taking back their sovereignty by expelling French troops and military bases, abandoning the French-backed CFA Franc currency, strengthening alliances with Russia, China, and other global players, and nationalizing resources that France once exploited. But this shift did not happen overnight. The recent wave of anti-French sentiments is the result of decades of frustration, betrayals, and economic hardships, as well as geopolitical maneuvering. Many African nations have grown weary of the exploitative economic arrangements, political interference, and continued presence of French military forces that they see as an extension of colonial rule. Now, the tides is turning as country after country moves to reclaim its independence. The key questions that arise from this transformation are critical. Why did these African nations expel France? What tactics did France use to maintain its influence for so long? And most importantly, what happens next for these newly independent nations? To fully grasp the magnitude of what is happening, we must break down France's past control mechanisms, the reason behind its expulsion, and its broader implications of its diminishing grip on Africa. Let's look at how France maintained control over Africa after independence. Well, let's start with military presence. Will that be counterterrorism or occupation? One of the primary ways France maintained its influence in Africa was through an extensive military presence under the guise of security agreements and counter-terrorism operations. France deployed thousands of troops across West Africa and Central Africa. Initiatives like Operation Serval in 2013 and Operation Barkhane in 2014, French forces in Mali and surrounding nations, ostensibly to combat Islamic insurgency. However, many leaders and citizens saw these deployments as a means for France to safeguard its strategic interests rather than genuinely fight terrorism. The continued presence of military bases in key nations such as Mali, Niger, Chad, Ivory Coast, and Senegal allowed France to exert direct control over regional security matters, often at the expense of local sovereignty. Whenever an African leader resisted France's military presence, they faced swift backlash, undermining national governments, interfering in internal conflicts, and even clandestinely negotiating with militant groups. Now, as African nations sought greater autonomy, these accusations grew louder, fueling widespread sentiments against French military operations. France also maintained control by ensuring that African leaders who prioritized French interests remained in power. This was accomplished through a combination of diplomatic back-ends, financial initiatives, and when necessary, outright interference in political affairs. Leaders who aligned with French economic and military objectives were rewarded with support. Those who sought to distance their country from France often found themselves ousted in coups or marginalized by Western-backed political opposition. Mali provides a clear example of this approach. When the military overthrew Mali's pro-French leader in 2021, Paris immediately opposed the new government. The rift widened as Mali's new leadership accused France of fostering instability to justify its continued presence. This pattern of undermining or removing independent-minded leaders has been a recurring feature of France's Africa policy for decades. The CFA Franc is one of the most controversial aspects of France's control over its former colonies. Established in the colonial era, this currency is still used by 14 African nations despite the fact that it is designed and controlled by France. Under the terms of the CFA Franc system, African nations must store at least 50% of their foreign exchange reserves in French banks, effectively giving France or Paris financial control over their economies. Because the CFA franc is pegged to the euro, France can unilaterally influence inflation rates, trade policies, and monetary stability in these African economies. This system has been widely criticized as a modern form of economic colonialism, keeping these countries financially dependent on France while limiting their ability to develop independence monetary policies. Beyond currency manipulation, France has also profited enormously from Africa's natural resources. Nations like Mali, Chad, Niger, and Burkina Faso possess some of the richest reserves of uranium, gold, and oil in the world. Despite this, the benefits have disproportionately flowed to France rather than the host nations. A striking example is Niger, which supplies 30% of France's uranium, critical for powering French nuclear energy plants, while 90% of Nigerians lack access to electricity. Similar patterns of resource exploitation exist across West and Central Africa, where French companies dominate key industries, extracting immense wealth while leaving local economies underdeveloped. France has also relied heavily on propaganda and media control to maintain its grip on Africa. French-owned media outlets like France 24, RFI, and Jeune Afrique have played a critical role in shaping political discourse, often favoring narratives that align with French interests. Criticism of France's involvement in African affairs have frequently been dismissed as Russian disinformation or anti-Western propaganda. However, the rise of social media and independent African news platforms has begun to expose France's actions in a way that traditional media never allowed. As information flows more freely, African citizens are increasingly rejecting France's narratives, greater national autonomy. Let's look at the countries that kicked France out and what happened. In August of 2022, Mali kicked out France. They said it didn't need France anymore. And Mali was one of the first countries to take a bold stand against French influence. The Malian government accused France of secretly negotiating with terrorist groups, undermining Mali's sovereignty while claiming to fight extremism. Additionally, the harsh ECOWAS sanctions imposed with French backing crippled Mali's economy, sparking mass protests demanding France's departure. In response, Mali's government terminated all military agreements with France and ordered all troops to leave by August of 2022. To replace France or French forces, Mali turned to Russia, inviting Wagner Group operatives to assist with security operations. French media was also banned and diplomatic ties with Paris was severed. In February of 2023, Burkina Faso also kicked France out, and they said, "Your time here is over." They expelled French troops amid rising suspicions of espionage and political influence. The Burkinabe government accused France of using its military bases for intelligence gathering rather than genuine security assistance. Furthermore, President Ibrahim Traoré sought to strengthen ties with Mali and Niger, forming a new regional alliance that excluded France. By February of 2023, all French troops were ordered to withdraw. Burkina Faso also took steps to reclaim its gold mines, previously controlled by French corporations, and pivoted towards economic and military cooperation with Russia and China. In December of 2023, Niger also kicked France out, and they said no more exploitation. The overthrow of Niger's pro-French government in July of 2023 marked another major blow to France's presence in Africa. France refused to recognize the new leadership, leading to heightened tensions. Niger's military accused France of illegally keeping troops on its soil, while also threatening economic sanctions to pressure the new government. In response, Niger announced in September of 2023 that all French military personnel must leave by December of 2023. The new government then took full control of Niger's uranium mines and shifted towards partnership with countries like Russia, Iran, and China. The mass expulsion of French forces and the rejection of Françafrique marks a turning point in African history. The long-standing system of economic and military dominance that France built over decades is now unraveling. However, the question remains: will African nations truly achieve independence, or will other foreign powers replace France's role? The future of Africa depends on whether these nations can build self-sufficient economies, strong security infrastructures, and effective governance without falling into new forms of dependency. One thing is certain: Africa's people are demanding change, and the old colonial order is being dismantled before our very eyes.